Hey, Guitar Nerd is here with another video on Elden Ring. Today I will be covering what I consider to be probably the best Frostfire Bleed build in the game, and that's because you can apply constant fire, frost, and blood loss damage without having to rely on any Ashes of War or any spells. Plus, it's dual wielding the same weapon type, so you'll get additional movesets, which makes it that much more enjoyable to use too. Now, you could use the Rivers of Blood with the Dragon Scale Blade, but its Ash of War applies a frost coating only for 20 seconds, not to mention how overused the Rivers of Blood is. You could also apply other Ashes of War to other katanas, but you'll either need to rely on using the skills or using spells to coat the weapon to get constant fire, frost, and bleed damage at all times. And while there are plenty of powerful and fun frost weapons that we could use, like the Royal Greatsword, we encounter the same problem where we can't constantly apply all three status effects at all times unless we end up having to rely on either spells or Ashes of War. So if you're interested, you'll need the Scavenger's Curved Sword and the Magma Blade, which I consider to be the best fire weapon in the game too. You will need to farm for it though, so to save some time, I've covered how to get both of these weapons in an earlier video if you want to learn how to stank these up real quick. Aside from getting these two curved swords, you'll also want to get the white mask so you can buff your attack power by 10% for 20 seconds when blood loss occurs. To get it, just follow this path to get to this area in the Mogwin Dynasty Mausoleum. It does require killing an NPC invader a couple times northwest of the Palace Approach Ledge Roadside of Grace, but it is well worth it for blood loss builds in general. To go along with it is the Lord of Blood's Exaltation, since it also increases your attack power by another 20% for 20 seconds when blood loss occurs, and this one can be snagged by defeating Esgar, the Priest of Blood, in the Lindale Catacombs. The Rotten Wing Sword Insignia is another great blood build option since it can raise your attack power by up to 13% after making enough successive attacks. Millicent's Prosthesis applies the same type of buff too for an additional 11% increase as well. Getting both of these talismans requires 2 playthroughs of the game, since you will receive the Rotten Wing Sword Insignia by aiding Millicent at the end of her questline, whereas you get Millicent's Prosthesis if you choose to fight against her instead. Once you have these talismans, the last one to get is the Fire Scorpion Charm, which is a great option for boosting the fire damage from the Magma Blade by 12%. It does also increase damage taken by 10% though, so feel free to change out Millicent's Prosthesis for the Dragon Crest Great Shield if you could use the extra 20% defense instead. Either way, you can find this charm on a wooden platform in Fort Laid within Mount Gelmer. Also, don't forget to use the Flame Shrouding and Thorny Crack tiers in your Flask of Wondrous Physic to boost your fire and physical attack power by up to 20% each too. And lastly, if you get Faith up to level 25, you'll be able to use Golden Vow for a 15% damage increase, as well as Flame Grant Me Strength for another 20% increase to physical and fire damage, so definitely be sure to use those if you plan on maxing out your damage buffs. Speaking of level requirements, you will need 14 Dexterity and 9 Strength for the Scavenger Curved Sword, while the Magma Blade requires 16 Faith, 15 Dexterity, and 9 Strength. Now, I know my level might be higher compared to what you could be working with, but I would mainly recommend hitting that second soft cap at level 50 for intelligence, since it scales with the Scavenger Curved Sword after applying the Frost Ash of War. Likewise, I would recommend hitting the level 50 soft cap for Faith to increase the fire damage and scaling of the Magma Blade. Aiming for the soft cap of 50 for Arcane is not a bad option either to help with scaling up blood loss buildup too. Both weapons also have C strength scaling, but the Magma Blade only has D dexterity scaling, whereas the Scavenger Sword has C dexterity scaling. Consequently, I would recommend spending your next points to get strength up to 50, and then work on dexterity next, but you may of course want to at least get your vigor up for survivability, as well as your endurance if you want to equip heavier armor or more secondary weapons. Once you have your equipment and stats good to go, you may ask yourself which hand to use to equip the Magma Blade. While you could use the Scavenger Sword in your right hand for easier access to using the Hoarfrost Stomp or any of the other Frost Ashes of War, I personally find using the Magma Blade special skill to be much more enjoyable with how quickly you can dish out damage with the spin attacks. The magma that stays on the floor for a little bit is a big plus too for getting those extra damage ticks in. And if you use it on the right enemies, you will completely destroy them within seconds while pumping out some large damage numbers. Obviously, you can two-hand these weapons if you want to use either Ash of War at any point, But if you want to save yourself some time and avoid button mashing, then I'd recommend equipping your main weapon in your right hand for your go-to Ash of War for any fights where the enemy is noticeably more weak to fire versus frost, or vice versa. Either way though, even if you don't use the Ashes of War for these weapons, just having them both equipped will dish out more than enough damage to quickly take down enemies. On another side note, it may be worth trying out the Claw Talisman and the Raptor's Black Feathers armor piece to boost jump attacks if you find yourself using it a lot. It is a great way to get in some quick extra damage in between attacks, or while altogether dodging the attacks completely by jumping over them, so definitely don't be afraid to experiment some to get that much more damage out of this build. One last potential contender I can think of for this build is dual wielding the Dark Moon Greatsword with the Blasphemous Blade. Both weapons are S tier. The Dark Moon Greatsword is a great option for frost damage, whereas the Blasphemous Blade can apply fire damage at all times while being able to heal you too. It would require a big equip load to dual wield these, and while we might not be able to apply bleed damage with these weapons, they might be worthwhile anyways with how much damage they can do. Alternatively, if you don't mind using spells, we can consider using the Blood Flame Blade incantation to do fire and blood loss damage for 60 seconds on another greatsword instead of the Blasphemous Blade. So if you're curious, feel free to let me know in the comments, and I may experiment more with these options to see if it is worthwhile covering at all. But if you enjoyed the video and feel like it has helped, then be sure to drop a like and subscribe to follow along. But as always, until next time, happy gaming!